Have any questions? No? Okay.
Let's move on. Everyone should have this document right here, which is headed Outstanding 2008 Plan Recommendations and Strategies. Everybody have one? Looks like this. Okay, if everybody has one, Kayla, I'm gonna ask you to cover this for us.
So I'm gonna so I'll explain what this is. So I went through the existing recommendations and strategies in the 2008 plan and determined which ones were not carried over and which ones were either directly or indirectly carried over into the new objectives. So the ones that are on this sheet, the outstanding 2008 plan recommendations and strategies, these are the ones that I did not explicitly see carried over either directly or indirectly. Now, I did, yes. Essentially, they remain priorities of the town and they appeared in the language or the intent of the objective. So one example is recommendation number 1, increase the possibility of preserving structures of historical significance. The strategy is to evaluate establishing a local historic district. Yeah, yeah, this is from the plan itself. I think it's page. Yeah, so it's page. Let me find it. Oops, sorry. Is it 32? Yeah, it starts on 32. I have it in a chart format, but yeah, so the first recommendation made in the comprehensive plan and the first strategy was labeled as not complete. And when you look at the draft objectives, if you look at community character 2, community character 2 reads development. Establish a new committee or empower the Open Space Conservation Committee or similar group to work with private property owners in nominating historic structures and or landmarks to the National Registry of Historic Places. And then community character 3 talks about educating the public about the value of historic properties. And so part of community character 2, nominating historic structures to the National Registry of Historic Places.
All right, so
Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying the things that are on this list are not carried over in this document?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's on you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I did receive a request to go through the plan accomplishments and touch briefly on the ones that were not completed and share where those appeared again in the draft vision objectives. So I can do that. Are you guys lost? Yep, that's all right. Yeah. 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 So page 32 of the plan. Yeah. There are multiple strategies that were not deemed not completed. And then there are some that were just blank And then there are some that are completed. You should have gotten it from the consultants. It's that.
Yeah, this is called 2008 Plan Accomplishments. Draft 1/26/22. Tom, this is your spreadsheet, right?
That looks like it.
I don't have that one with me today. Are we gonna be reviewing that one?
Yeah, we were given this. And so
We were given it.
All right, where are we? Which document are we working with right now? I'm getting confused too.
As well as the one. We're gonna go through this very quickly, but have a discussion on the ones that are not.
Okay.
Ones that are not carried over. These are the ones we're gonna have a discussion on. And then I'm going to brief touch on the ones from this part that were not included, but carried over. Okay?
So they're not completed, but they are reflected in this.
Is everything that's marked completed on this chart? None of that carries over, is that correct?
It may pop up again as a for the community, but these are specific strategies.
So what we're dealing with today are only, as a rule, the non-completed.
The not completed or the ones that have a blank.
Thank you.
That have not been carried over.
So that have not been carried over. So we're going to have discussion on this. Yeah. The outstanding 2008 plan recommendations and strategies. And then I'm going to go through the not completed strategies and explain where they were carried over. Okay. Yeah, and the strategies, if you want to follow along with me, start on page 32 of the plan.
Kayla,
So-
could I mention something when you're finished?
Yeah,
So at the expense of confusing. Am I on? Okay. Confusing everybody. There's another piece of paper that shows the linkage between what's mentioned in the 2008 plan and 2023 plans.
Who was that produced by, John?
This Bill Seaman.
It's
and,
not been
Dan-
distributed to the entire committee. You have it?
Yeah, everybody's got a copy of it.
Okay.
And like I say, we're getting a lot of pieces of paper here to look at. What this one does is makes a side-by-side comparison of the recommendations that are in the 2008 plan and those that are in our current plan, 2023, whether we mention them or not. So it gives a comparison. So we could say, okay, this recommendation from 2008, we don't mention it. And I think that is your chart also, don't mention it.
yeah, it's similar to what I've put together. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Kayla, go ahead.
Okay, so like I said, we're going to talk about each strategy from the 2008 plan that was deemed not completed. And I'm going to explain where that was carried over. For the ones that were not carried over, we'll come back and have discussion about that after. So the only two pieces of paper, the only piece of paper you need right now is this one, the outstanding 2008 recommendations. And you need, if you don't have this chart, open your comprehensive plans to page 32. That's the only two or three things you need in front of you right now. Okay, good, okay. All right. So the first recommendation is to increase the possibility of preserving structures of historic significance. The first strategy under that recommendation, which is to evaluate establishing a local historic district, is carried over into community character 2. That's the objective it's carried over into. So actually, you guys will need one more document. So this chart or the comp plan, page 32, the outstanding 2008 recommendations, draft vision statements and objectives. That's it for right now. Okay, so turn to page 4. Good. Yeah, sorry, turn to page 4 of the draft vision statement objective. So that's this guy. Yep, so turn to page 4 in that. Okay. All right. So recommendation 1. That is. Yeah, that looks like the right one. Yeah. Making sure that's it. Okay, so recommendation 1, strategy 1 is carried over into community character 2. When we look at nominating structures to the National Registry of Historic Places, part of that conversation will be examining whether to implement a local historic district. So while it's not carried over verbatim, it is part of that action. Okay.
If I'm understanding correctly, what we're doing here broadly
Mhm.
is we're doing what we were charged with doing, which is updating this plan.
Yep.
So what you're trying to do is take things that we've identified that we'd like to talk about and we need to decide whether we actually want to move this and put this into the updated plan as a strategy under this particular recommendation.
Yes, because they remain uncompleted.
Right.
Yes. And the ones that I'm going through now, I believe have been carried over. While maybe not verbatim, they will be addressed by the action proposed.
They would be addressed if we agreed that this is what we wanted to put into the plan.
If ultimately, when we come back to the objectives as proposed.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so recommendation 1, strategy 1 is shows up in community character 2. Recommendation 1, strategy 2, which is educate property owners on value of historic structures, shows up in community character 2 and 3. All right, let's see. So going to page 33. Recommendation 2, ensure areas outside the town limits but within the ETJ are preserved.
Are we going to pause on each of these for deliberation? What's our process?
I'd like to move through these a little bit quickly so that we can focus on the ones that did not show up anywhere. If there are any specific ones that people feel warrant discussion, just let me know. Otherwise, I'd like to move through these a little bit quicker in the interest of time.
So I have a question on this document, the draft vision statement objectives.
Mhm.
To what degree are these draft objectives, have any of them been adopted?
No.
Because we've never discussed them.
You
And
haven't.
are we going to discuss them in the language and adoption of these?
So after we go through the current plan and what has not been carried over, when I say carried over, I mean
That show up in the draft?
show up in the draft objectives. After we do that, we're going to go through the objectives. And we're going to talk about the objectives that had a do not support or strongly do not support vote in them. If they had a strongly support, neutral vote in them, and no do not support, strongly do not support vote, I left those off in the interest of time. We can go through each objective if you guys want to. I'm just trying to maximize time here.
So I just wonder whether a survey is really adequate for finalizing objectives
Now
without
I-
discussion, without deliberation. I mean, to me, this is the heart of our task
Mhm.
is, and in my mind, these objectives require real deliberation and discussion. And I said in a sidebar conversation to Richard after our last meeting, what we need is a day-long retreat, not an hour meeting. If we're actually really going to do deliberation on these,
If the committee wants to go through each objective, that's perfectly fine with me. That's fine, yeah. Yeah, so most of the ones that are on this sheet that I've slated for the discussion today, it's most of them. But like I said, if the committee wants to go through each one, that's perfectly fine.
I have no interest in like spending 1 minute more than necessary on this task, but it is,
Sure.
I'm trying to take the task seriously.
Yeah.
And I don't think surveys are worth much personally.
Okay, that's fine. So if that's okay with the rest of the committee, after I finish this piece, we can go through each of the objectives, okay? Does that sound okay to everybody?
Sure.
Keep in mind the objectives and the numbers on the objectives are your votes.
Right.
Your votes, this
Well-
committee's votes. Okay.
Okay. All right,
Can I
so,
make a quick comment about that? I mean, what's interesting to me is interesting to me about the votes is the comments below.
Yeah.
And frankly, I voted neutral on a number of these things because I don't know enough about what the impacts of the objectives would mean to vote yay or nay. I might be strongly in favor, but for me, the discussion is at least
Sure.
is important in informing my understanding of what it would require
Yeah.
of institutions and private landowners here in the valley, as you know, before I can actually adequately say that I strongly support it. So
okay. Yeah, so we'll go through them. I'll make sure that, any questions related to zoning, land use, you guys have the information you need. And then, yeah, then we'll see where we go from there. But let's get through this because we do have a lot of recommendations that we need to, that I'd like to cover. Okay, so moving on. Recommendation 2 relates to preserving the ETJ. Strategies 1, 3, and 4 these are all elements that would be evaluated when we talk about the environmental and development goals as far as evaluating how we better protect land, evaluating how we manage growth. So even though those were not necessarily completed or not completed, I believe those are carried over. So that's strategy 1, 3, and 4. Now, strategy 2 was not labeled as completed or not completed. So I've put that one on our discussion sheet. So we'll come back to that one. Okay. Yeah, everyone know where we are? Okay,
Recommendation 2, strategy 2 is not carried over.
no, and we will come back to that. Okay. All right. Recommendation 3, this is about design of new and renovated structures. Creating architectural guidelines and design guidelines, that will be part of the discussion involved and the work involved in community character 2 objective. And again, this is evaluated on how the objectives are written right now. Okay. Number 3, creating the Montreat Manual for Land Development Standards, that's listed as not complete. I don't see that carried over into the draft objectives, so we'll come back and discuss that one. Okay. All right, recommendation 4, the character of Assembly Drive. We're going to come back and discuss both of those strategies because I did not see them show up. Okay. That is recommendation 4, strategies 1 and 2.
34.
Yes, sorry, top of 34. Let's see. Number 5, modify zoning ordinance recommendation 5, strategy 1, modifying the zoning ordinance to allow a more compact form of development. This will be evaluated with the environmental and development goals when we talk about how we'd like development to proceed.
So reconsider or carried over.
That's carried over. Okay, then we're jumping down to recommendation 10, which is on page, thank you,
Does that mean that
36.
6, 7, 8, and 9 are not carried over?
6, 7, 6 is complete. 7 is complete. There is no 8.
That's right.
And number 9 does not exist.
Number 9, what?
Does not exist. That's the consultants determined that the National Wildlife Federation that this let's see.
Like infeasible or not?
I'm not, to be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure. So let's flag that one and come back to it when we have discussion. Okay, moving on. Recommendation 10 is about signage and wayfinding. Both of these strategies are carried over into proposed objective development 5 and transportation 1. Both of those have to do with signage for the town. Excuse me, implementing the comprehensive plan. This is going on to page 36 of the plan, recommendation 1. So strategy 1 and 3 are internal processes, and these would be part of the implementation plan, not the objectives. So we can bring those into the implementation of the plan, but they're not objectives as far as the growth and development of Montreat.
So you suggest striking them from carryover?
Yeah, not, we will discuss them when we talk about implementation. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, moving on from there, going to page 38 of the plan, talking about tax bases and revenue. So I did not see recommendations 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 carried over. So I have flagged those for discussion. Okay. Now, I will say that a lot of this funding, it may be more appropriate to have a objective of adopting some sort of strategic plan that would include things like this. But that's something that we can talk about in a minute. Okay. All right.
So 3 got rolled over?
3, yeah. So that's part of, that's mentioned in the new goals, and also building fees are reevaluated annually and privilege license tax is preempted by the state. So going on to page 39 of the plan, as part of MRA and Montreat College. Recommendation 1, strategy 1, exploring joint ventures for co-development projects. That's in transportation 3. That's in the objective transportation 3. Encourage public-private partnerships. I have that flagged for discussion because I did not see that carried over. And then strategy 3 is complete because we have a new town hall. Going on to page.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the status of strategy 2?
We're going to talk about that. Yeah, flag for discussion, and I don't believe it was carried over. Let's see. So page 41 of the plan, moving on to housing. Strategy recommendation 1, strategy 1 is completed. We have defined uses for R1 and R2. The consider zoning map amendments with reductions of R1 and R3 districts. That will be evaluated with environmental and development goals, because that's when we're talking about the intensity of growth and things like that. So that'll be part of that discussion. Recommendation 2, modify zoning and subdivision ordinances. We do have a conservation subdivision option in there, so that's complete. Strategy 2, modify minimum lot size, again, evaluated with environment and development goals. Now, the one thing that consultants did say is that one thing that they did not really see in these objectives as part of the public engagement is land use objectives. So that's something that I think we can talk about as we get into the actual draft vision statement objectives, is maybe have something a little bit more concrete to examine land use, because a lot of these carryovers would generally occur when we talk about environmental protection and things like that. But it may be good to have something a little bit more solid. So we can come back to that, just a suggestion. All right, going on to recommendation 3, strategy 1, this comes back to evaluation with environmental and development goals. Recommendation 4, strategy 1, again, evaluated with environmental and development goals. And then recommendation 4, strategies 2 and 3. I did not see that come up in the new draft vision statement, so I flagged that for discussion as well.
One was completed, recommendation 4, strategy 1.
No, that's carried over. Okay, going to page 42, talking about commercial services. Strategy 1, recommendation 1 is carried over into development 2 draft vision statement. And then strategy 1, recommendation 2 was adopted. We do have a town center overlay district.
Sorry, what page are you on?
I'm on 42.
Pete, I'm sorry, for recommendations and implementation strategies on page 42.
Mhm.
Where are we on those two?
So strategy 1 is carried over into development 2, the draft vision statement, and then strategy 2 is complete. So we have a town center overlay district. Okay, moving on to page 44 of the plan, traffic and mobility, that's vehicular. Recommendation 1, strategy 1, that's an internal policy, continuing street maintenance. We don't need to make that an objective. Recommendation 2, strategies 1 and 2, I did not see those carried over, so I flagged that for discussion. Recommendation 3, strategy 1, I did not see that carried over, so that's flagged for discussion. Recommendation 3, category 2, this is the permit system for overweight vehicles. That's under transportation 5 as part of the transportation planning. Are we all good? Yeah, keep going. Okay. Okay. Recommendation 4, strategy 1. This was labeled as completed. So that's where I left that. Recommendation 4, strategy 2, visitor vehicle fee. That'll be evaluated with the transportation goals, since a lot of these goals have a lot of these objectives have include doing a study. And so part of doing a study would be, how do we handle parking, things like that. So that would be a possible solution that would come out of that.
When was that study? You know, I see that's listed as complete, that strategy. When was that performed?
I'm not entirely sure, but
Do we actually need a
For-
study to know what the actual vehicle count in the summer what day.
No.
I'm gonna,
So the parking, the objective that I reference does not specifically say vehicle count. Yeah, and I'll check. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure when that study was done, but I can figure that out. Yeah, I've made a note. Okay. Recommendation 5, that says completed. Recommendation 6, strategy 1, again, this is a solution potentially, so that'll be evaluated with the transportation goals. Moving on to page 45 of the plan, traffic and mobility, non-vehicular. So this would be, bikes, walking, the like. Recommendation 1, strategy 1, that's found in objective transportation 6. Recommendation 2, strategies 1, 2, and 3 are labeled as completed. Now, we'll say that, even if these are labeled as completed, that doesn't actually mean they exist. Could have been that someone looked at them and said, this is not feasible. We're not doing this. So just as, because it completed could give the sense that, oh, these things exist, but they may not. Someone may have looked at them and
so
said,
completed also means abandoned.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. We are still on recommendation 2. Strategy 4, but yes, we are about to go on to 3. Okay, recommendation 2, strategy 4, that's in transportation 6. Now going on to recommendation 3, strategies 1 and 2, those are both in transportation 6 because that has to do with mobility network. Recommendation 4, strategy 1, that's in transportation 6. Recommendation 5, strategy 1, that was completed. Recommendation 6, strategy 1, this is carried over into the objectives, but I don't remember which one. Transportation 6. Recommendation 7, strategy 1 shows up in transportation 1 and 5. And then recommendation 7, strategies 2, 3, and 4 show up in transportation 6. So a lot of these are carried over as, remaining interest of the town, Okay, now we're going to page 48 of the plan.
Are we not looking at parking recommendations on page 46?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. I skipped too far ahead, page 46. Traffic and parking. Recommendation 1, strategy 1, that was carried over into transportation 3. Recommendation 2, strategies 1 and 2 were also carried over into transportation 3. Parking recommendation 3, tabletop parking, not entirely sure what that meant. And so the consultants have labeled that as does not exist.
I think a tabletop parking structure, if I'm not mistaken, is where you use existing grade to basically build a parking deck
On
where
top of
somebody
it.
drives onto the grade. So
Okay,
from an upper tier,
okay.
I think.
Yeah, so I mean, that would be not complete, but examining parking solutions would be part of a lot of the transportation goals.
There's a definition of that. In the public plan.
Oh, there is.
Pretty close.
Okay, recommendation for strategies 1 and 2. This is again about parking, and that falls under a lot of the transportation goals. Recommendation 5, requiring off-street parking based on number of bedrooms. We require in the zoning ordinance, parking based off of the heated square footage of the structure. So that's complete. Recommendations, Recommendation 6, strategies 1 and 2, again, evaluated with transportation goals. Recommendation 7, strategy 1, that can be found in transportation 6. Recommendation 8, strategy 1 can be found in transportation 1. So now we're moving on to our last section, page 48. This is infrastructure. So there are three recommendations and 4 strategies. Recommendation 1, strategy 1, recommendation 2, strategies 1 and 2, and recommendation 3, strategy 1. None of those were carried over that I could find. Now we do have on here that recommendation 2, strategy 3, which is identify reasonable sources to best serve demand and evaluate each option. That's labeled as completed. So I didn't flag that for discussion.
Can you just repeat which one was completed?
Recommendation 2, strategy 3. Yeah. But the other 4 were not carried over. So I flagged those for discussion to see if they're still of interest. So now that we've gone through that, I'd like to go back to the ones that were not carried over and have some discussion on them. And really what I hope that we can get out of this discussion is whether or not these strategies or even the topic that the strategy addresses, whether that's still of interest, whether it's something we need to explore, whether it's something we want to see again, or whether it's something that today is just not, you know, a piece we'd like to include. Okay. So now we're back on here. Okay, and we're going to go through these one by one. Before I do that, does anyone have any questions, thoughts? No? Okay. Oh,
Questions and thoughts about what?
just in general about what we're talking about. I know that was a lot of information.
Okay.
So what we're trying to find out, let me just see if I got this. These are not directly or indirectly addressed in the 2023 plan. Do we want to add them or not?
Or do you think that, you know, yeah, or do you think maybe in my evaluation that I missed something, that these do show up, you know, anything like that? Okay, so we'll do the first one first. The first one. The recommendation is to ensure areas outside the town limits, but within the ETJ are preserved. And the strategy was to update the zoning map to clearly delineate each district. To be, you know, frank with you guys, I do think our zoning districts are pretty well delineated. So I don't really know if we need to carry this forward.
I don't know why this was labeled as not completed.
Yeah,
It's an ongoing thing and
yeah.
we're very much aware of the ETJ and the control that we have over it and are paying a lot of attention to it. Almost weekly, right, Bill?
But is there a need to update the zoning map? I think is.
We update the zoning map every time there's a rezoning. That's by law, we have to do that.
Right.
So you don't need it in the comprehensive plan because the law guides you.
I don't think so.
So I'm fine with it. No.
Okay. All right, the next one is to guide the design of new and renovated structures to foster consistency. And the strategy was to create the Montreat Manual for Land Development Standards. Now, I will say that, you know, the other strategies that were under this recommendation will be discussed when we talk about the objective community character 2. The other thing I want to say is that in North Carolina, we cannot impose design guidelines on residential structures unless we have a historic district. So we are limited and only in that district. So we are limited in what we can do.
So does that mean that unless a historic district is created, this is a moot point?
Mm-hmm.
Then I would say that this is a no, simply on the basis that if a historic district is created, this will become part of it.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, I think when I read Montreat Manual, this feels to me like something that is really usable by the public. You know, has a lot of pictures, exactly, not.
Nah.
I mean. No, I mean, I think that if we wanted to assign it to, I think one of the, and we'll talk about this when we talk about implementation, is some of these historic goals about historic character and preservation really need a champion committee to do that. That could be something that could go under that committee to explore, but I would caution and make it very clear that these are suggestions because we cannot legally enforce that.
Yeah, to people who are not normal lawn treaters,
Mhm.
again, suggestions, just a comfort, just a overall, our vision.
Better, yeah, so I think as far as the zoning laws go, in Montreat, I think it would be fine to work on some public material for that, but as far as the town preparing a suggestion as far as architectural guidelines, that's not something that we'd be able to do.
That was.
Now, that
was-
committee could,
The committee could, but not
But-
the town. It's
Right.
But
No.
published by the town. of Montreat.
Right.
no,
Got it.
we would
So
not
we
do
could
that.
do it independently. It doesn't need to be in the plan.
Mhm.
So is number 2 a no?
I'd say no, yeah. The next one is about Assembly Drive. So create an overlay district that allows for a variety of uses and set standards for the overlay district. So we'll say that Assembly Drive, the part of Assembly Drive in front of Lake Susan and the inn, that's under the town center overlay district. We could definitely explore what, other avenues of zoning regulation on Assembly Drive. We could take the overlay district for the town center off of that portion of Assembly Drive. If there are concerns about the character of Assembly Drive, we could certainly carry this over.
I'm not even sure what it means, preserve the character of Assembly Drive.
I'm
What does
not
that
either,
mean?
because it's already zoned either for the hotel or for residential, so if you're gonna preserve it, it's gonna be preserving it residential to me.
So what do we have on Assembly Drive? We have Parkland when you come in the gate. We have residential homes. We have the Graham family offices, which are a modern structure, or well, a contemporary structure. They're not necessarily modern. They've been there for my whole lifetime at least. I'm not modern.
That's true.
We have more homes. We have a recreation area that is zoned institutional. We have a post office that's zoned institutional. We have the triangle area at Collegiate Circle, which is zoned institutional. Then we have RI or IR district property. Then we have residential, we have residences within that IR district back to institutional. So the character and the other side of the street is All Creek or our campus.
Yeah, so I will say, creating an overlay district, that would really only apply to new development or renovations. So one thing to think about when we think about zoning regulation in Montreat is that Montreat is very built out. We do see some new development, but for the most part, doing an overlay district, obviously would have an impact, but we can't change what's there.
So what's the case for carrying this over? Because it seems like a no to me just by listening to your description.
It was the worry. What is the worry that would happen to Assembly Drive that we would put this in to offset?
So it's not solving a problem.
Well,
Now, Now, under strategy two, if you guys go on page 34 of the plan, it does provide some suggestions
Yep.
for what standards. Minimum setback of 100 feet from the center line of the road. Currently, we require, it's mostly 30 feet from the edge of from the front building line. And Assembly Drive has a 30-foot right of way on either side, so that's about 60 feet already for new development off of Assembly Drive. Building height, we do have a maximum of, it's generally 30 feet, 35 feet, something like that. So a lot of this that is here is very similar to
Sorry.
what is already being enforced. And again, you know, these new standards would apply to new development. We wouldn't force existing development to amortize. Now, if something rebuilds, that's a very interesting question because there are certain provisions that allow them to maintain their non-conforming use. Yeah, so it is possible that you could build a structure back in the exact same footprint if it did burn down. So it'd be case by case basis.
But if you had a home within a new, an expanded setback off of Assembly Drive or any structure, you would really, and became instantly a non-conforming structure, then you'd be limited to that specific footprint to anything you wanted to do in the future.
Anything you wanted to do that would not comply with the current regulations.
Well, if the regulation said you couldn't build within 100 feet of the center of Assembly Drive, then you couldn't add your bedroom.
If it did not meet that requirement, yeah. So. All right, moving on to housing. Let's see. So going to page 41, recommendation 4. Allow a variety of residential dwelling types to increase housing diversity. The two strategies under here that were not carried over were to modify the ordinance to allow townhomes in the town center and allow for student housing in the town center area. Right now, tell you exactly what's allowed there.
What is the town center 2 area?
It's the area where the lodge will be built.
So we're gonna make that student housing instead of the
That's
lodge?
right. We're going to give it to you.
Okay, I accept. You just simplified my life. Thank you, Richard. This is, I'm having a good day.
Where are you in the plan? Oh. It allows for multifamily development. It allows for residential development.
So the IR, if it is a dormitory, it's not permitted in the IR district. If it is a multi-unit dwelling, it's permitted. 2-family, duplex, single family are permitted in that area.
So let your mind rest on this for a second. While I had to get a special use permit to build a lodge, I could have, or the MRA more accurately, could have sold the property to a developer, and the developer could have built a 120,000 square foot apartment building on that property without a permit. Not a special use permit, it's a permitted use.
To say it's not going to get a permit.
Oh, well, it
Yeah.
would not require the special use permit we had to get our building.
Sorry.
Better use a microphone.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, there are, a mix of residential uses allowed in that area.
Can you remind us what Town Center 3 is?
So Town Center 3 is, where Richard said it was.
He said that's 2.
That's two.
Oh, that's 2. Town Center 3
That's where you are.
looks like it's right across from or surrounding Lake Susan.
I think it's a college campus going up Lookout Road.
That's what it appears to be, yeah.
Hmm.
And then Town Center 2 is down to the east of that. Surrounding, I think, more of the college's property. No,
Town Center 2, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is property that exists along Assembly Drive. Maybe I've got it backwards.
no, I don't think Assembly.
There's a description of it here in your plan.
Mhm.
Town Center 2.
Town Center 2 is to the east of Lake Susan and south.
You said that's your lodge. It's Town Center 2.
Thought it was to the west.
No,
We should figure this out.
yeah, yeah. So I will say that about this specific recommendation, the recommendation is to allow a variety of residential dwelling types within Montreat to increase housing diversity. So if we focus more on that recommendation, we can decide to carry the strategy forward, but, think about that recommendation and whether or not that recommendation supports the 4 visions.
Well, does housing diversity really go with our goal? Because most of them are private residential structures. And when you say housing diversity, I get all hyperventilated because I think of it as public housing or so maybe, is it just condos, townhouses, that sort of thing?
So, yeah, so when we talk about housing diversity, we talk about things like townhomes, things like apartments,
Condo, I mean, something other than
Something-
single family dwelling.
a duplex, something like that. We're not talking about
At one point,
necessarily.
we did talk about affordable housing. I mean, that was the conversation.
Yeah,
while back.
that is part of it, but when you think about affordability, I mean, it's about like a teacher at Montreat College being able to afford a condo
Right.
or something. Right, so that's
So it's not as diverse as I'm giving it credit. But that's good.
so it's about offering housing across, different incomes, ages, stage you are in life, things like that. So, yeah, I mean,
I just want to correct myself. Town Center 1, I was
Ah.
confused. Town Center 1 is you were correct, Kayla. Town Center 1 is the property to the west that comes
Yeah,
down
then
Assembly Drive, and Town Center
2 is
2
for
is the
the- yeah.
property that goes up around my college.
yeah,
Town
I'm-
Center 2 is the college
There's a
property.
description of it on page 28. The maps are confusing. Just look at, they tell you where it is. On page 28.
So essentially what these 2 strategies are talking about is to provide more diverse housing in these 2 areas. In the areas that are in the town center.
Now, we're
I
going
mean-
to deal with the higher density with the ADUs and the.
Well,
I'm
we're
sure
gonna
we'll cover
touch,
that
we're gonna touch on
separately.
that, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think both of them need to be yes.
I think this is very, very important because this is what's going to change the complexion of Montreat is the density of the housing.
yeah, and we'll
lots.
talk about density when we get to the proposed objectives.
So the Town Center 2,
We're saying yes to both of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Traffic and mobility, vehicular. So there were 3 strategies. This is page 44. This is strategy, recommendation 2 and 3. Evaluate platted but non-built streets for abandonment if not needed, and evaluate placing weight limits on streets to minimize damage impact. I don't know if you guys want to carry these forward or not. This is really focused on kind of cleaning up
What do you think?
The town has closed several streets recently that
Yeah.
have not been used at the request of the property owner. They're just platted there, but they'll never be used because they're built out as backyards of other homes or whatever. And we've closed, I don't know, 2 or 3 streets in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think it's well within reason to look at the streets that we have that are alleys or whatever they are and evaluate the potential use of those, whether they get to a home or whether they need to be closed. And I think they ought to be closed personally.
We're really talking about rights of way most.
Yeah, rights away, not actual built roads.
So are
Yeah.
you saying yes to inventory all platted but non-built streets, Tim, to keep evaluating this?
I would agree with that.
Michaela, I have a question. The
Yeah.
only question I would have about this goes back to the whole update zoning map thing. You know where your rights of way, aren't you? Don't you? I mean,
Yeah, we do. I think, the,
to say you don't have an inventory already. Are you really unclear as to what rights of way you have? Seems like you know. When you say inventory, do you mean study and come up with assess the need for? I mean, that's a different kind of thing than just inventory. Review.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Does everybody understand that friendly
Yeah.
amendment?
Okay,
We don't want to spend any money on that either. do
So
we?
instead
no, that would be, we
Want
wouldn't,
the
no,
volunteers who
no, that would be something that
want Bill Shy to do it.
we'd do it internally. That's.
Oh, I know.
Okay, so the next one is rank order of all platted but non-built streets by usage. I don't really see a need for that one.
Well, what is I mean, it seems like so what I'm hearing from the 2008 plan here is a need to evaluate existing rights of way and decide which ones should remain under the control of the
Dedicated.
town and dedicated to the town for future potential use,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Well, it seems like that would be a part of the review
Yeah.
above, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next one is the geotechnical
So we're
study.
saying yes to the second one?
Well, it's just, it's built into the first
Yeah.
one.
Conduct geotechnical study to evaluate acceptable weight for trucks. I didn't state that one as carried over, but there are certainly some objectives that would lend themselves to potentially including that. So for example, transportation 5 is develop a freight plan. I don't know if you guys want to specifically carry that over or not.
Well, I guess my question as it relates, go ahead, Maggie, I'm sorry.
Is that something we need to decide? It seems like the weights that the roads could accommodate has already been established, so we don't crack the concrete. Is that something we need to discuss?
I don't think so.
I
What do you
know,
think?
I know our gate puts limits.
Yeah.
On the size of vehicles. I mean, even with the roundabout or whatever you call it, the drive around. There's certain vehicles that have difficulty. Now, I'm sure you can get a semi in here. I've seen them.
Now, we'll say that the gate would be addressed by a freight plan. Freight plan. The handling the gate and actual route and things like that, what gets come through, what doesn't.
So Kayla, are you recommending no on this third one?
I would, yeah. Moving on to funding resources. I think, and I've talked to the consultants about this, and their recommendation was that things like these should fall under something like a strategic plan that the town would put together to evaluate these funding resources, rather than having them in the comprehensive plan. And that instead of having them specifically called out, have an objective of adopt a strategic plan to investigate new funding sources for the town.
I
So we need
concur.
to remember that as we go through.
I
all the
mean-
Topics, which ones need to be, have a funding mechanism.
But yeah, I mean, well, that will be part of the implementation and really, right now, this is really aspirational. We don't, I mean, obviously we can't say, you know, build Disney Park in Montreat. But we don't necessarily need to be realistic, but we don't need to identify the funding source right now.
So I would agree that this is a strategy.
Yeah.
Not a comprehensive plan plank.
And the town is currently doing all of these. We're constantly investigating new revenue sources. We're submitting grants and having grants written and so forth. So it's pretty well covered, I think, by what we're currently doing. And it's an ongoing process to continue to look for revenues for the town of Montreat.
So would you say then that we just, you know, this is more internal? Okay.
Go for all of
Can,
those.
can I make a comment? Or just ask questions? So, Tim, it seems like this is kind of at the root problem of, you know, why we can't make more improvements that we'd like to make for the town. We don't have the revenue. And it was addressed in the 2008 plan with many pages of ideas captured by these recommendations, like the grant, hiring a person to do grants. Is that all on your agenda? The town is working this?
It's constantly on the agenda, John. It really is. We ask our town manager to seek out and find somebody through Land of Sky to help us write a grant or a request. We're getting,
That's what I'm here for.
yeah, and that's what Kayla does. We've got coming a good bit of money for the bridge that was done through seeking a grant and so forth. We're constantly seeking other sources of revenue.
So would it help you or not if we mention this in the comprehensive plan? Would it help the town?
No, it's going to be done anyway.
Okay.
So no on all of these.
Okay, so the last section is water
Yes,
resources.
before we leave
Yes.
that last section, I do think it is important in our discussions before this committee disbands, since we are updating and looking at the 2008 plan, to look at revenue assumptions and needs on which the 2008 plan was based.
Mhm.
Because we do have 14 years that have transpired since they made certain assumptions about growth that would happen and continue.
Mhm.
I think we need to do it before and after. Were they right? Is this the way we grew? Was this where the revenue was needed? Why was it needed? And so forth. Because John is right. Revenue as a concept is at the heart of a lot of what
Yeah.
has been recommended that we need to do. And so we're gonna have to deal with it at some point.
Who would do that?
I'm not saying it needs to be done. I'd like to review the plan itself and say, okay, they were assuming this.
Mm-hmm,
Did that occur?
mm-hmm,
That kind of thing.
okay. Yeah, I mean,
So
Like I-
again, as an example, they assumed that the MRA was going to continue to grow between
Mhm.
2008 and 2022.
Yeah.
We have not grown.
mhm.
So our need for revenue has grown during that time. Why has it continued to grow if we have not grown?
That's a source of income and you're absolutely right. I don't know how to predict. We couldn't predict the COVID and what it did to you at the hotel where you were normally giving us X number of dollars
Right.
and we budgeted $40,000 or $50,000 and it just wasn't there.
Right.
Because you didn't have the bed, bodies in the beds.
Right.
So
I'm just saying the
Yeah.
dynamics around this conversation may have shifted over the
Yeah.
last 14 years, 15 years. And it's worth examining whether those assumptions were borne out and or how they might have shifted over the intervening 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to build that into our current process and build that into the plan, and I'm just struggling to find a response. So let me come back to that.
Sure.
I will say that, you know, like I said, this plan is aspirational. And it's really based on the needs of the community today. And we certainly look back and say, what's changed? What have we accomplished? What have we not accomplished? What remains the same? In terms of, you know, obviously, I think revenue is critical to these
Yeah,
conversations.
it's not even necessarily just about revenue. It's just that's what I thought of it. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is, it seems to me that if a plan is aspirational, then the plan is looking into the future and expecting certain trends.
Mhm,
Well, and yet our task is to update this plan.
mhm.
So it seems relevant to update the assumptions on which the plan was based,
And
given the transpiring 15 years between 2008 and 2020.
so that's what the consultants did through the public engagement. Is engaging the public, understanding what the needs of the community and the desires of the community are today. I believe I'll have to look back through their presentations, and maybe get in contact with them, but I do I mean, they have looked at what's changed in terms of the needs and desires of what came out of the process of this plan and what came out of the process, what's going into the process of the new plan. I will say, so the new plan is based on today. The new plan looks at what had happened, but the assumptions that that plan is based on is today.
Okay.
So, but let me see if I can get some more concrete information on that
Sure.
from the consultants. Okay, going on to the last one, water resources. This is, page 48.
Those all are ongoing processes for the town. You probably don't know it, but we have wells that go down and we drill another well or extend that well. The things we'll have to continue to look at in the future are storage. And it's just things that, you know, it's an expected. Daniel, when you turn on your water, you expect to get water. And when we have a fire, we should expect to hook to a fire hydrant and have adequate amount of water.
So, Mr. Mayor, you think these are operational,
I
not,
think those are operational rather than a strategy, you know, needing a recommendation. of a
Kayla, you
strategy.
agree with that? So we're saying no to all these.
Cool.
I still don't like the word aspiration. Because the bottom line is, it's all about the money. And I don't think you can say, well, you know, hoping to get. To correct that, at least we should say, ongoing or, something better than that. I appreciate somebody jumping in, but aspirational is just something on the back burner when the first thing you need is money.
Yeah, I mean, I totally hear what you're saying.
Right.
And I agree with you 100%. If, you know, at the end of the day, if there's no money, it's not happening. And so that's why I say, you know, it is about the vision, but also be realistic about what the objectives are. And this plan is meant to serve as a guiding document, and it should inform the decisions that the town is making. I know I look at the comprehensive plan that we have now frequently as I'm, you know, enforcing the zoning ordinance. It's my guiding document. And so while the plan itself is not necessarily where we identify the revenue sources, it is certainly a part of the implementation. So maybe there's something that we can put in the implementation that feels a little bit more concrete. Does that feel okay? Okay. All right, so now we're gonna go on to the draft vision statement objectives.
Excuse me,
Yes.
what do we imagine being the end of this meeting? I can't stay that late. And I'd love for us to come up with a date for another meeting before we adjourn. That seemed to work last time. So I'm not saying we need to stop now. I just, as we charge into something, I'm going to have to leave in about 20 minutes. What's that? Yeah. We understand.
Yes, I know you do. Are we looking as soon as next week potentially?
Okay, do I see some heads nodding or not?
I can try.
How about Tuesday? Noon to 1:30?
Tuesday, the 31st.
Sorry, the 7th. Or I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong week. My apologies.
I thought by next week, you meant next week.
Good, that's
Yeah.
my wedding anniversary day. I don't know what I'm doing.
Are you looking at Tuesday? You can't do any Tuesdays, Mari?
No, just that.
Okay. So Tuesday, February the 7th. Were you throwing that out there?
That's what I was throwing out. February 7th from 12 to
I
1:30.
can do that.
12 to 1:30.
We don't check.
Okay. February 7th,
It's a
12 to
miracle.
1:30. Got that, Angie? Will you send out reminders to everybody? Thank you. Be sure Bill Seaman gets one because he didn't know about this meeting.
Okay,
As
so,
long as Tim provides lunch.
so
I can get it to 2.
I can make that work.
Great, thank you.
So since today, I've only included the draft vision statement objectives that had a do not support or strongly do not support objective. We'll just start with these, and then at our next meeting, I'll make sure that we have all of them. Okay? So we'll just start with these today. Okay. All right, so again, I point you guys back to the vision. Make sure you have the vision statement sheet and the draft vision statement objectives in front of you. So we'll keep referring to the vision and whether or not each objective supports that vision. It's ultimately what we keep coming back to. And again, whether it feels, realistic. Okay, so the first one, environment 6, as part of a greater townwide climate resiliency plan, work with local and regional partners to conduct an energy audit of privately owned buildings and major institutions to assess options for energy savings and reduction. What are the committee's thoughts on that one?
Are we again?
So I will say that Monterey is part of Buncombe County and Madison County's hazard mitigation plan because we're one of the municipalities in Buncombe. We can incorporate climate change specific objectives, but we do have a regional plan that addresses this climate resiliency aspect.
I guess I have 2 questions on this one. One is who pays for this, the assessment? And 2 is what part of the assessment is binding?
What do you mean by binding?
Is there anything that's obligatory? Is it just an assessment? Here's the information,
Mhm.
or is it more than just the information?
it usually, I mean, they're usually not binding in the sense that if you upgrade, are they?
I would imagine they're not.
They're not. I mean, it's basically information for
Yeah.
your use if you want to become more energy efficient. It's like any kind of audit.
Some of us have very old buildings.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so it's
But-
very, very high cost. to
But I mean,
us.
we also, so, you know, we would do an energy audit by when we were renovating a building. We know we have old buildings that leak. We
Mhm.
don't need somebody to come in and tell us how bad they leak because we pay the bills. So I guess, I mean, again, I probably, I don't really exactly remember what I voted, but I'm sure it was on the north side of that box and the supporters strongly support. But again, if I'm going to be asked to pay for an energy audit of 35 buildings so that the town can check a box the next time we look at this, I'm not sure I'm willing to do that.
Mhm.
And I'm exactly in the same place. We have, when we've done like 45 renovations and we're evaluating these things constantly. But I don't want to pay for something I'm not going to use.
What do the townsfolk think?
I agree. That's to my own house.
Well, I mean, there might be a volunteer who buys a home in Montreat who does this for fun.
Mhm.
I have no idea. I'm open to the idea and I'm
Mhm.
open to it with reasonable cost to the idea, particularly when, you know, I can get anybody, conservative, liberal, tree hugger, you know, civil libertarian, doesn't matter. I can get them to agree to anything as we can show that we can save money as a result of energy efficiency, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm strongly in favor of expressing this as a value in our community. I just want to make sure that we see the downstream impacts of what it takes for homeowners and basically private landowners in
Mhm.
terms of any kind of mandate on something.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be mandated and I don't imagine the findings would be binding in any way. I think, Richard, you said it right. What are the stream impacts? How would we use this information? And again, bringing you guys back to the vision. Montreat values and protects its tree canopy, streams, land, and natural beauty. And whether or not this objective supports that
I mean, as a general-
and feels feasible.
well, all I'm saying is as a general, as it is currently written, that doesn't seem binding to me on property owners. You know, it's not mandating that we have to do anything but it is expressing a value in the community and an encouragement to those of us who own property to be as energy efficient as possible when we go forward. And so on that basis, I support it.
Mhm.
Whether if we need more language to ensure that we're not encumbering private landowners added to this to make it feel more explicit about what it is and isn't, I'd be up for that. I'd be happy for any amendment in that regard, but this is something that obviously we want to promote as a town.
Mhm.
And somewhere in the town's plan, we ought to maintain our promotion of it.
Mhm.
Suggestion and objective that we could, as a theme, for our little code.
So-
Promote energy efficiency, and what's required, maybe what's suggested. That sort of thing. It's
So-
for
so-
housing goes.
So if these are this information recommendations only, I have a hard time justifying this as part of the town budget expenditure.
Well, if the town went about it, all we would do would be to provide the information to the citizens to have Duke Energy come into their home and help them conduct a savings there. You know, that's the only thing that,
So the private homeowner or the institution would pay for it.
Yes,
If they wanted to.
if they wanted it,
Suggested.
and that's
we would
what-
encourage it, but you know, that's.
So you make it available.
Well, that's what Maggie's suggesting by putting it in the Montreat manual. I guess it's already got a name.
It just got created.
Yeah, because it wouldn't be something that Montreat would pay for. It would be something that the individual would be more interested in.
And even the resources to go to. If like big powers.
Right.
As a whole.
Well,
So
Duke Energy sends us a report every month on how, you know, on our power usage, whether we've saved money or not.
That would
And
make
most
all-
people probably already get it.
So I actually don't think this is consistent with the vision statement of environment. I think this is a
No,
different
I don't
thing.
think so either.
And I, if it's part of the manual, then it's not part of the town plan. Because we already said that the manual shouldn't be part of the town plan.
Well, it's not, yeah, not published by the.
I support it, but I don't think it ought to be included.
I yield.
All right. Next one. Environment 7, support private property owners in the creation of conservation easements on private land within the areas the plan identifies as having high risk environmental assets. Now, I will say that, and this is echoed in the comments, high risk environmental assets needs to be defined. And so if this objective is to stay, part of this objective would be defining what a high risk environmental asset is considered.
And there's currently no definition.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Could you give an example? This is like, what exactly would this prevent?
Well, if you do a conservation easement, you can't build in it, you can't disrupt the land, anything, it preserves, it's, I mean, you could, take dangerous trees down and things like that, but it would preserve its natural character.
Like the lake? Is that what you're talking about?
No, it would be like the Montreat Wilderness. Yeah.
And Montreat MRA does this already. A lot, the land use committee recommends, they bought land in the past and put it into conservancy. So I think it's being done.
Mhm.
The Open Space Conservation Committee does it as well.
And so I think the intent of this objective is that this would further that effort as a solution, as a possible avenue to protect the land and natural beauty with private property owners.
There's one thing I would like to add, not necessarily to this, but to the environment, and it falls under development and community character, all of those things. And that is something that I didn't get to clarify because I wasn't here last time. And I'm sorry about that. But one of the things on the agenda was the concern about Montreat College development, which was mine, but it had almost nothing to do with Montreat College. It was misinterpreted. My concern is not so much with diversity as with density. Montreat is not infinite. Its resources are not infinite. They are finite. And I would like to know somehow or other, whether through a study or whatever, how close we are to hitting that wall, because there's going to be a wall sooner or later. And that goes for water, sewer, traffic, all of those things. And that's my main concern, is how much can Montreat bear?
So I want to hold on to that and talk about it more when we get into some of the development objectives.
Okay.
Because it does tie into environment, but it feels like if it was gonna live somewhere. Yeah, so let's come back to that. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So let's come back to this objective. I mean, what does the committee think about, continuing this effort of conservation easements as an avenue to achieve that environmental vision?
There's really only one private property owner in Montreat who has sufficient land for this to be a relevant concern. I mean, why are we couching? I mean, I don't know what else. And so I'm happy to leave it in because the language doesn't feel threatening to me in the
Yeah.
least. I think for the town to promote the conservation of lands that are currently privately held is a great thing. The question is how and what resources is the town willing to provide to see that happen? We could have built a new lodge on the land currently occupied by Lake Susan. We would never do that. I would never do that anyway. But I'm saying there's a lot of flexibility within these zoning laws to do things that we ruled out immediately. But we have all this land and we would, somebody mentioned, well, why can't, let's, it's somewhere in these plans is a suggestion that we move with, can we conserve Lake Susan? Sure. We can move toward conservation easement so that you couldn't develop Lake Susan. What is it worth to the taxpayer to do that?
I think
That's the question, and that gets back to Daniel's question. This is where revenue begins to roll into, you know. I would never, in case anybody happens to be online, I would never propose doing anything to Lake Susan. I love Lake Susan. And hopefully everybody who comes in the job after me and the people who are on the board, but it's zoned institutional property. It could just as easily be a creek.
I guess my perspective on this, on number 7 here is an enormous amount of Montreat is already in a conservation easement. Like a vast,
Roughly half.
roughly half, vast percentage. And to me, this cuts against the grain of the thing we're not putting in the plan, and that is revenue. So there's very little land that can be further developed for revenue for private homes or whatever that would not put a strain on the town or any of its services, but would create revenue. And it seems to me putting this in cuts against the grain of that need of the town. So I don't mind leaving this in or saying yes to this, but I think it cuts against one of the great needs. And I wonder whether it's wise to put this in.
I'm more than happy to work with the town to look at ways to conserve a substantial percentage of our property. I'd advocate for that. I'd want the town's blessing on it. I'd want the town's support in our efforts to do that. And our board isn't going to walk away from assets that it currently pays taxes on and other assets that it has without those considerations. So
So
I'm
could we,
sorry I have to leave, but
yeah, could we say that it's just something to think on? Explore conservation easements as a tool for land preservation?
sure. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, all right, on that.
It's wonderful.
Say that again.
Explore conservation easements as an avenue for land protection.
Situation. That begs the situation. Don't make a big decision right now.
And there are tiny pockets of land in Montreat that are owned by property owners. But that land's going to be owned by somebody. And that land, even if it's conserved, will come with a cost. Yeah.
Okay, folks, entertain a motion to adjourn until
moved.
the 7th. Is that correct? 7th of February at 12 o'clock,
12 to 2.
12 to 2 in this room. We stand adjourned.